The encounter. The Lincoln Heights precinct was bustling with the usual morning activity as Maya Williams walked through its doors for what she knew would be one of her last days in the station she had called home for over 15 years. The morning sun cast a warm glow across the precinct, catching the silver threads in her dark curls and reflecting off the worn, familiar badge on her hip. Today, she wore civilian clothes, a soft, navy blouse, and tailored slacks, marking a small but significant change in her role. She'd worked hard to reach this point, and her promotion to captain was finally in sight. She paused in front of her old desk, running a hand over the armrest of the chair that had supported her through countless cases, long nights, and moments of triumph and frustration. Maya's eyes sparkled with pride, mixed with the bittersweet knowledge that she was leaving behind a legacy in Lincoln Heights that she poured her heart into building. This place held years of memories, and stepping up to captain meant she would soon pass her responsibilities on to someone new. "Morning, Maya," a familiar voice called from across the room. It was John Gurney, a fellow officer and one of her closest allies in the precinct. His salt and pepper hair and relaxed smile were as much a fixture of the place as the worn linoleum floors. "Morning, John," Maya replied with a warm chuckle. "You're just in time to see me off into the big leagues. Thought I'd give the blues a break for the day. Get used to these civilian clothes." John laughed, lifting his coffee mug in a mock toast. "You'll miss this place, won't you? All the chaos, the late-night coffee, the cases that kept you up at night." Maya nodded, glancing around at the familiar faces and the constant hum of voices. "Parts of it, yes. But it's time for someone else to take over, to bring new energy and a fresh perspective. Speaking of which, I'm here to meet my replacement, Officer Darrell Thompson. Thought I'd size him up myself before handing over the reins." Gurney raised an eyebrow, giving a knowing nod. "New blood, huh? Heard he was top of his class at the academy. But you know how it is. Fresh faces are all the same, eager, a bit green, and sometimes needing a reality check." Maya's gaze turned contemplative. "They all do. But this precinct is more than just a training ground. It's a community, a family. I need to know he's the right fit, not just for the job but for the people we serve here." As if on cue, the front doors swung open, and in walked a young officer. Darrell Thompson had a clean-cut appearance, his dark hair neatly trimmed, and his uniform crisp and spotless. He moved with the careful, measured steps of someone trying to project confidence, though the slight stiffness in his shoulders suggested a hint of nerves. Maya observed him closely, taking in his posture, his alert eyes, and the way he held himself with a sense of pride and purpose. She recognized that look. It reminded her of herself years ago, determined to make a difference but still learning what it truly meant to serve. "That's him," John murmured, "ready to take on the world, by the looks of it." Maya nodded, smoothing her blouse and preparing to introduce herself. But before she could step forward, she noticed something unsettling in Darrell's demeanor as he glanced around the precinct. His eyes settled on her, dressed in her civilian clothes, standing casually by the desk. She could see the judgment in his gaze, a flash of irritation, perhaps even disdain, as his mouth tightened slightly. He walked past her without acknowledgement, muttering under his breath. Maya couldn't make out the words, but the look was unmistakable. She'd seen it before, too many times, from people who thought they could size her up at a glance. People who assumed, based on her appearance alone, that she was less than who she was. Darrell's irritation grew as he approached the front desk and addressed the desk sergeant. "Officer Darrell Thompson, reporting for duty," he said in a firm tone, pulling out his paperwork and glancing back at Maya with a hint of annoyance. "I was told to report here for my first day." The desk sergeant looked up, then nodded toward Maya. "Sergeant Williams is here to meet you, Officer Thompson. She's the one you'll be replacing." Darrell's face registered confusion, then disbelief, as he looked back at Maya. "Her," he muttered, louder than he'd intended. Maya heard him this time, her eyes narrowing as she observed his reaction. She held his gaze, calm and unyielding, as he tried to process the realization that the woman he had dismissed so quickly was the very person he'd come to meet. "Is there a problem, Officer Thompson?" she asked, her voice even and professional. Darrell flushed, realizing his error but unwilling to back down entirely. I didn't expect." He trailed off, unsure how to recover without further embarrassment. His face reddened as the weight of his assumptions settled on him. Maya decided not to give him an easy out. "You didn't expect what, Officer Thompson?" He swallowed, struggling to maintain his composure. "I didn't expect to meet you here, Mom," he managed, though his tone lacked conviction. "Then allow me to introduce myself properly," Maya said, stepping forward with authority. "I'm Sergeant Maya Williams, soon to be captain. I've served this precinct for over 15 years. And you, Officer Thompson, are here to take on the position I am leaving behind." Darrell's face burned with shame, but he forced a nod. "Yes, Mom. I apologize." Maya's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained sharp. "Apologies are a good start, but actions speak louder than words. Let's see if you're ready for this responsibility." She turned and led him toward the office, aware of his discomfort but determined not to coddle him. As they reached the office she'd occupied for years, Maya gestured for him to enter first. Darrell hesitated, then stepped inside, looking around at the space that he assumed would soon be his. As he took in the office, Maya closed the door behind them, letting a heavy silence fill the room. Darrell fidgeted, uncomfortable under her steady gaze. "Tell me, Officer Thompson," she began, crossing her arms, "what brings you to Lincoln Heights?" Darrell straightened, eager to regain some control of the situation. "I wanted to make a difference, ma'am. I want to uphold the law, serve the community, and follow in my father's footsteps." Maya tilted her head, watching him closely. "And do you think that begins with making assumptions about the people you're here to protect?" He stiffened, realizing she was referring to his earlier behavior. "No, ma'am. I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" She interrupted, her tone firm but calm. "Judge someone based on appearance. Assume that because I wasn't wearing a uniform, I was less than what you expected." Darrell opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. Maya let the silence hang, giving him a moment to process the weight of his actions. "You'll find, Officer Thompson," she continued, "that this community has no shortage of strong, resilient people who have faced assumptions, prejudice, and worse. People who are counting on us to do more than just enforce the law. They're counting on us to protect them, to understand them, and to see them for who they are, not what they look like." Darrell nodded, feeling the shame wash over him. He realized that this was more than just a dressing down. It was a lesson, one that he desperately needed if he was going to serve in this precinct with integrity. Maya softened her stance, sensing his contrition. "Now I believe in second chances, Officer Thompson, and I'm willing to give you one. But it comes with a condition." He looked up, eager to prove himself. "Anything, ma'am." "You will shadow me for the next few weeks," Maya instructed. "You'll go on patrols, meet the people, learn about the community, and understand what it really means to serve here. I want you to see beyond the surface, to understand the stories and struggles of the people we protect. Do you accept?" Darrell nodded earnestly. "Yes, Mom. I accept." Maya extended her hand. "Good. Then let's get to work." They shook hands, and in that moment, Darrell felt a newfound respect for the woman he had so quickly dismissed. He realized that she was more than just a superior officer. She was a leader, a mentor, and a force to be reckoned with. As they left the office together, ready to embark on his training, Darrell knew he was about to experience a journey that would challenge not only his skills, but also his perspective. And though he had a long way to go, he was willing to put in the work, hoping to earn the respect of the community and of Sergeant Maya Williams. Learning the ropes. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lincoln Heights as Maya and Darrell stepped out of the precinct and into the community. Maya moved with a quiet confidence, her gaze taking in every detail of the street, from the faces of people passing by to the subtle shifts in the atmosphere that marked the beginning of another day in a neighborhood she knew intimately. For Darryl, however, everything felt new and overwhelming. The sights, sounds, and even the people seemed foreign to him, a stark contrast to the quiet, suburban life he had grown up in. They walked side by side, Darryl glancing occasionally at Maya, who was dressed casually yet carried an unmistakable air of authority. Her presence commanded respect, and people on the street greeted her warmly. Darryl noticed how people's faces lit up when they saw her, as if Maya was more than just an officer. She was a part of their lives, a familiar figure who belonged in this community. "So, Officer Thompson," Maya said as they turned a corner, her tone calm but with an underlying firmness. "Why don't you tell me a bit about why you wanted to join the force?" Darryl hesitated, caught off guard by her directness. Well, my father was an officer," he began, his voice faltering slightly. "He served for 25 years, and I grew up admiring what he did. The way he brought order to the community, how people respected him. I wanted to be like him." Maya nodded thoughtfully, keeping her eyes forward as they walked. "A noble goal. But tell me, what does bringing order mean to you? Is it about enforcing rules, or something more?" Darryl felt himself tense. He had never really questioned the ideals he had inherited from his father. "It's about following the law, ma'am. Upholding justice, and making sure people respect it." Maya stopped walking, turning to face him with a scrutinizing gaze. "And do you think respect is something you can demand, Officer Thompson?" Darryl felt a flush of discomfort creep up his neck. Well, yes. As officers, people should respect us because we're here to protect them." Maya sighed, her expression softening as if she was letting him in on a hard-won truth. "Respect isn't a uniform, Darryl. It's something you earn through trust, consistency, and understanding. The people in this community don't respect me because I wear a badge. They respect me because they know I'm here for them, that I see them as people, not just as citizens or cases to close." Darryl looked down, her words cutting through his preconceived notions like a knife. He realized that his vision of policing had always been one-sided. He had thought of himself as an authority figure, an enforcer, but he hadn't considered what it truly meant to serve. They continued walking, Maya pointing out various spots in the neighborhood and introducing him to shop owners, residents, and community leaders along the way. She greeted each person by name, asked about their families, their lives, and listened intently to their responses. Darryl noticed how people opened up to her, their faces softening as they shared stories, concerns, and small victories. It was a side of policing he had never imagined. A partnership, a connection. As they made their rounds, a voice called out from across the street. "Maya, good to see you." They turned to see an older man, maybe in his 70s, standing outside a small grocery store. His face broke into a wide grin when he saw Maya, and he walked over with a slight limp, his hand extended in greeting. "Mr. Carter," Maya said warmly, shaking his hand. "How are you today?" "Getting by, thanks to folks like you," he replied, his eyes crinkling with warmth. He turned his gaze to Darryl, looking him up and down. "And who's this?" "New recruit." "This is Officer Thompson," Maya introduced. "He's here to help us keep the community safe." Mr. Carter nodded, his gaze scrutinizing Darryl in a way that made him shift uncomfortably. "Well, Officer Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of lived experience, "welcome to Lincoln Heights. Folks here don't always have it easy, so you be good to them, here. Treat him right, and they'll treat you right." Darryl forced a polite smile, nodding. "Yes, sir. I'll keep that in mind." As they continued down the street, Darryl couldn't shake the feeling that he was being judged, not just by Maya, but by everyone he encountered. It wasn't the kind of judgment he was used to either. It was a silent test, a question of whether he would see the people in this community as individuals with stories, or just as a part of his job. It was uncomfortable, but a part of him knew it was necessary. Later that day, Maya took him to a youth center tucked away in a quiet corner of the neighborhood. Inside, kids were playing basketball, doing homework, and chatting with mentors who volunteered their time to help keep them off the streets. The energy in the room was palpable, a mix of youthful excitement and hope. "Why are we here?" Daryl asked, glancing around, feeling out of place in his uniform. "To meet the next generation of Lincoln Heights," Maya replied, her eyes softening as she watched the kids. "These are the ones who will inherit this neighborhood, and they need to see that we're here for them, not against them." She walked over to a group of teenagers who were gathered around a table, sketching out plans for a community project. Maya introduced Daryl, and they all looked at him with wary curiosity. "This is Officer Thompson," Maya said, her tone gentle but firm. "He's new to our community, so let's help him feel welcome." The kids nodded, though Daryl could feel their guarded gazes. One of them, a boy named Malik with bright, inquisitive eyes, looked him over, clearly sizing him up. "You gonna be like the other cops?" Malik asked, his voice tinged with challenge. Daryl felt a pang of defensiveness but caught himself, remembering Maya's words. "What do you mean?" Malik shrugged, crossing his arms. "You know, the ones who come around just to arrest people, make trouble, and then leave without helping." Daryl swallowed, feeling the weight of the question. He knew this was his moment to prove himself, to show that he wasn't just another cop who saw them as potential criminals. "I'm here to keep you safe," Daryl replied carefully, aware of Maya watching him. "But I'm also here to listen, to understand what's going on in the community. If you ever need help or want to talk, I'm here for that too." The kids exchanged glances, their skepticism fading slightly. Malik seemed to soften, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement. Maya placed a hand on Daryl's shoulder as they left the youth center. "You did well in there," she said quietly. "They don't trust easily, but you showed them respect. That's the first step." As the day went on, Daryl's understanding of Lincoln Heights deepened. They responded to calls, visited local businesses, and spoke to residents. Each interaction chipped away at his initial biases, revealing the complex web of relationships, struggles, and resilience that defined the community. He began to see them as people with hopes, fears, and dreams, not just as faces in a crowd. But it wasn't always easy. As they patrolled one block, a young mother with a toddler stopped them, her face lined with worry. "Officer Williams, there's been more trouble down by the old warehouse. A few guys dealing drugs, scaring people. Can you do something about it?" Maya nodded, reassuring her with a gentle touch on the shoulder. "We'll check it out, Ms. Jensen. Thank you for letting us know." Daryl tensed, his mind racing with images of confrontation and potential danger. "Should we call for backup?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his holster. Maya shook her head, her expression calm. "Not yet. Let's assess the situation first." They approached the warehouse, where a group of young men stood, their postures wary but not immediately threatening. Maya greeted them with a calm nod, engaging them in conversation without raising her voice. She asked questions, listened to their stories, and spoke to them with a firm but respectful tone. Slowly, the tension eased, and the young men dispersed without incident. As they walked away, Daryl couldn't hide his astonishment. "How did you do that?" "They just listened to you." Maya smiled faintly. "Respect goes both ways, Officer Thompson. People are more likely to cooperate when they feel seen and understood. Not every problem needs force. Sometimes, all it takes is a conversation." Daryl felt a flicker of admiration and humility. He realized that he had much to learn, not just about the technical aspects of policing, but about the human side of it, the side that required patience, empathy, and a willingness to see people for who they truly were. That night, as they returned to the precinct, Daryl felt a sense of exhaustion mixed with something unfamiliar, a sense of purpose. He had come into Lincoln Heights thinking he would be an enforcer, a bringer of order, but he was beginning to see that his role was so much more. It wasn't about control or authority. It was about connection, trust, and the hard work of building relationships. Before they parted ways, Maya gave him a final piece of advice. "Remember, Daryl," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of years, "we're not just here to uphold the law. We're here to serve the people. If you keep that in mind, you'll do just fine." As he walked away, Daryl felt the weight of her words settle in his heart. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly serve. And though he knew he had a long way to go, he was willing to take the journey. The weight of responsibility. The weeks passed in a blur of long shifts, late nights, and eye-opening experiences as Daryl continued his training under Maya's watchful eye. The initial tension between them had slowly softened, and Daryl had come to realize how much he could learn from her. Her understanding of the community, her patience, and her ability to diffuse situations without escalating them taught him more than any classroom or textbook ever could. One afternoon, as they were returning from a routine call, Maya gestured toward a small diner on the corner of a bustling street. The neon sign flickered above the door, and the smell of coffee and fried food drifted into the street. "Let's take a quick break," she suggested. "I want you to meet someone." Inside, the diner was cozy, with worn leather booths and faded photographs of the neighborhood from decades past. The regulars looked up briefly as Maya and Daryl entered, nodding to Maya in recognition. She had a way of blending in, of becoming part of the space she occupied, while Daryl still felt like an outsider, stiff in his uniform and unsure of how to connect. They slid into a booth, and within moments, a waitress in her 50s with a warm smile and kind eyes approached them. "Maya, you finally brought someone new along," she said, her eyes twinkling as she looked at Daryl. "Martha, this is Officer Thompson," Maya introduced. "He's the new recruit." Martha extended a hand, which Daryl shook, noting the strength in her grip. She'd clearly worked hard all her life. "Nice to meet you, Officer Thompson," she said, her voice carrying a motherly warmth. "I hope Maya's been treating you well." Daryl chuckled nervously. "She's been teaching me a lot, actually. It's eye-opening." Martha smiled knowingly and placed 2 mugs of coffee in front of them. "You're in good hands, then." She patted Maya's shoulder affectionately. "This one's a treasure to our community." Maya smiled but quickly turned the conversation back to Daryl. "Martha's been here for as long as I can remember," she said. "She knows this community better than almost anyone. People come here not just for the food but for a little piece of home. Isn't that right, Martha?" Martha shrugged modestly. "I just serve coffee and listen to people's stories. Sometimes that's all they need. A place to be heard." Daryl listened quietly, sipping his coffee and absorbing the words. The way Maya spoke about Martha, the way Martha spoke to him. It reminded him that there was more to being an officer than simply enforcing the law. There was a responsibility to connect, to understand, and to see people beyond their surface. After Martha walked away to attend to another table, Maya leaned in, her voice low but firm. "That's something I need you to understand, Daryl. People here aren't looking for saviors or authority figures. They want allies, people who'll walk with them and stand by them. That's the kind of officer I need you to be." Daryl nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. "I think I'm starting to understand that, ma'am. I know I still have a lot to learn, but I want to do right by these people." Maya's gaze softened. "That's a good start, Daryl. But actions speak louder than words. Let's see how you handle what comes next." They finished their coffee, and as they left the diner, Maya received a call on her radio. There was a situation developing at the community center. A group of teenagers had been caught spray painting the back wall of the building. Daryl's first instinct was to call for backup, but Maya shook her head, reading his intentions. "We're not going in guns blazing for some kids with spray paint," she said calmly. "Let's just talk to them." When they arrived at the community center, Daryl saw a group of 3 teenagers huddled around the wall, cans of spray paint still in their hands. They froze when they saw Maya and Daryl approaching, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. The graffiti wasn't gang-related or particularly offensive, just colorful designs and symbols that seemed to express something they couldn't put into words. "Hey there," Maya greeted, keeping her tone casual. "Mind telling me what you're up to?" The tallest of the boys, a lanky teenager with a buzz cut, stepped forward, trying to look tough. "We're just making art," he muttered, his gaze shifting nervously from Maya to Daryl. Maya nodded, examining the wall. "I see that. Some pretty impressive work. But you know, this wall doesn't belong to you. You didn't get permission from the center to paint here, did you?" The boy looked down, muttering under his breath. "No, we didn't." Daryl watched, expecting Maya to start reprimanding them, but instead, she surprised him by asking, "So, what's the story behind this art? Why did you choose to paint here?" The kids exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Finally, one of the younger boys, barely 14, spoke up. "This place, it's where we hang out, you know. It's where we feel safe. We just wanted to leave our mark, to show we belong here." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. It's important to feel like you belong somewhere. But leaving your mark doesn't have to mean breaking the rules. There are other ways to express yourself, ways that show respect for the community you're part of." The boys looked at each other, their bravado melting away. Daryl felt a pang of understanding. He realized these kids weren't trying to cause trouble. They were just searching for a way to be seen, to feel valued. Maya continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Tell you what, we won't write you up this time. But I want you to help clean this up. After that, let's talk to the center director. Maybe we can work something out so you can create something permanent, something that the whole community can enjoy. How does that sound?" The boys' faces lit up with relief and excitement, nodding eagerly. "Thank you, Mom," the tallest one said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We'll clean it up, I promise." As they walked back to the patrol car, Daryl felt a strange mix of admiration and humility. You could have arrested them. You could have filed a report and taught them a lesson, but you didn't. Maya looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Arresting kids isn't always the answer, Daryl. Sometimes, the real lesson comes from understanding and guidance. Those boys will remember today, not because they got in trouble, but because they were given a chance to make things right." Daryl nodded slowly, feeling a newfound respect for the way Maya handled herself. He realized that being an officer wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about understanding the people behind the actions and helping them find a better path. As the days continued, Daryl began to take on more responsibility. He patrolled the streets with Maya, handling calls, diffusing conflicts, and learning to interact with the community on a deeper level. He discovered that each person he encountered had a story, a reason for the choices they made, and he found himself less inclined to judge and more willing to listen. One evening, as they were wrapping up their shift, Maya pulled Daryl aside. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her expression serious. "Tomorrow, I'm stepping into my new role as captain. You'll be on your own for a while, and I need to know that you're ready." Daryl's heart sank. The thought of patrolling Lincoln Heights without Maya's guidance was daunting, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Maya, I don't know if I can do this without you." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze filled with warmth and pride. "You can, Daryl. You've come a long way since your first day here. I've seen you grow, seen you learn to see people for who they are. Remember, being an officer isn't about power or control. It's about service. And I believe you're ready to serve this community with integrity and respect." Daryl nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He knew Maya was right, but the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. Still, he felt a surge of determination. He had come to care deeply for the people of Lincoln Heights, and he wanted to live up to the standard Maya had set. The next day, Maya officially assumed her role as captain, leaving Daryl to navigate the streets of Lincoln Heights on his own. The days that followed were challenging. Without Maya's steady presence, he faced moments of doubt, uncertainty, and even fear. But each time he felt himself falter, He remembered her words, the lessons she had imparted, and the faces of the people he was sworn to protect. One afternoon, as he patrolled a quiet street, he spotted Mr. Carter, the elderly man he had met during his first week in Lincoln Heights. The old man was struggling with a heavy bag of groceries, and Darrell quickly crossed the street to help him. "Need a hand, Mr. Carter?" he asked, lifting the bag with ease. Mr. Carter looked up, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "Ah, Officer Thompson, good to see you again. You're a regular fixture around here now, aren't you?" Darrell chuckled. "Trying my best, sir. Just trying to do right by this community." Mr. Carter nodded approvingly. "You're doing well, son. Keep it up, and this place will feel like home soon enough." As Darrell walked away, carrying Mr. Carter's groceries to his doorstep, he felt a deep sense of pride and purpose. He was no longer just an officer in a uniform. He was becoming part of the fabric of Lincoln Heights, a figure the community could rely on, someone they could trust. And though he knew he still had much to learn, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to honor Maya's legacy and build one of his own. A test of character. With Maya stepping into her new role as captain, Darrell found himself alone on the streets of Lincoln Heights, the very neighborhood that had once intimidated him. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders, but he was determined to honor the lessons Maya had taught him. He knew that simply wearing a badge was not enough. He had to earn the trust and respect of the people he served, a process that had been slower and more challenging than he'd initially expected. The days that followed were filled with the routine calls that defined a beat officer's life: noise complaints, traffic violations, and the occasional dispute that required de-escalation. Darrell took each encounter as an opportunity to practice patience, empathy, and respect. He reminded himself of Maya's words, her emphasis on connecting with people and understanding their stories. Little by little, he began to feel a shift, not only in the way the community responded to him, but in the way he saw himself. One Friday evening, as Darrell prepared to finish his shift, he received a call about a disturbance at a local grocery store. He sighed, mentally preparing himself for another long night, and made his way to the scene. When he arrived, he found the store owner, Mr. Patel, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a furrowed brow, arguing with a young man who looked barely out of his teens. The youth was tall and thin, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. As Darrell approached, Mr. Patel turned to him, relief flooding his face. "Officer Thompson, thank goodness you're here. This young man tried to steal from my store." The young man glared at Mr. Patel, his face flushed with anger. "I wasn't stealing. I was just hungry, man. I was just trying to get something to eat." Darrell felt a pang of sympathy as he looked at the young man, whose clothes were worn and whose face was drawn with exhaustion. He remembered the lessons Maya had taught him, and he knew that this was a moment where he could choose between enforcing the law and understanding the person in front of him. "Let's take a step back," Darrell said, keeping his voice calm. "What's your name?" The young man hesitated, glancing between Darrell and Mr. Patel. "It's Jamal," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "All right, Jamal," Darrell said gently. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" Jamal took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as he spoke. "I lost my job a few weeks ago. Been trying to get by, but I haven't had anything to eat in 2 days. I came in here hoping I could find something cheap, maybe enough to get me through the night. I wasn't trying to steal. I just didn't have enough money." Darrell looked at Mr. Patel, who was watching Jamal with a mixture of frustration and sympathy. The store owner let out a sigh, shaking his head. "I don't want to press charges, officer. I don't like people coming into my store thinking they can take whatever they want. But if he's hungry—" He trailed off, his tone softening. Darrell nodded, sensing an opportunity for compassion. "How about this, Mr. Patel?" he suggested. "If you're willing to let this slide, I'll make sure Jamal has something to eat tonight." And Jamal, he added, turning to the young man. "You'll come by the station tomorrow. We'll help you find some resources, maybe connect you with a shelter or a food bank that can help." Jamal's eyes widened, surprise and gratitude flickering across his face. You'd do that?" Darrell smiled, feeling a sense of purpose swell within him. "Everyone needs a little help now and then. Just promise me you'll try to stay out of trouble, all right?" Jamal nodded vigorously, a small smile breaking through his weary expression. "Thank you, Officer Thompson. I promise." After arranging for Jamal to get a meal from the store, Darrell watched as the young man walked away, his steps lighter than when he'd arrived. Mr. Pittle gave Darrell a nod of approval, and Darrell felt a surge of pride. He knew that Maya would have handled the situation the same way, choosing compassion over punishment, and he was proud to have followed her example. The following day, Jamal showed up at the station, just as he had promised. Darrell helped him connect with a few local resources, including a job training program and a nearby shelter that offered meals and temporary housing. As they talked, Jamal opened up about his struggles, sharing stories of the hardships he'd faced and the dreams he still held on to. "You're a good guy, Officer Thompson," Jamal said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "Most cops wouldn't have given me a chance. They'd have thrown me in a cell and forgotten about me." Darrell shook his head. "People make mistakes, Jamal. But it doesn't mean they don't deserve a second chance. Just keep moving forward, all right? Don't let one rough patch define you." Jamal nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I won't forget this. I'll make you proud." Over the next few weeks, Darrell continued his rounds in Lincoln Heights, each encounter adding to his understanding of the community. He learned to read between the lines, to see the humanity behind the actions, and to recognize the struggles that often went unseen. Slowly but surely, he felt the respect of the neighborhood growing, the guarded look softening as people came to see him not just as an officer, but as someone who cared. One evening, as Darrell was finishing up a shift, he received a call from a woman in distress. She lived on the edge of Lincoln Heights, in a part of town notorious for its rough streets and struggling residents. Her voice was shaky on the phone as she explained that her teenage son, Andre, hadn't come home that night, and she feared he might be involved with a local gang. Darrell's heart sank as he listened to her fears. He knew how easy it was for young people to fall into the wrong crowd, especially in areas where opportunities were scarce and temptation was close. Without hesitation, he promised her he'd look for Andre and bring him home safely. As he drove through the darkened streets, Darrell kept his eyes peeled for any sign of the boy. His training had prepared him for situations like this, but it hadn't prepared him for the emotions that came with them. The fear, the hope, the sense of duty that went beyond just doing his job. After nearly an hour of searching, he spotted a group of young men gathered near an abandoned building, their voices low and tense. Among them, he saw Andre, a lanky teenager with wide, fearful eyes. Darrell approached cautiously, keeping his voice steady and calm as he addressed the group. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his gaze fixed on Andre. "Andre, your mom's worried about you. Think it's time you headed home." The other boys scoffed, muttering under their breath, but Andre looked at Darrell, a mixture of relief and apprehension in his eyes. I was just hanging out," he stammered, glancing nervously at his friends. Darrell took a step closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Hanging out doesn't have to mean getting into trouble. Let's go. Your mom's waiting." Andre hesitated, casting one last look at his friends before nodding. He walked over to Darrell, who placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward the car. As they drove back to Andre's home, Darrell spoke quietly, his tone laced with understanding. "You're at a crossroads, Andre," he said. "You've got people who care about you, a mother who's worried sick. Don't let a bad choice take you down the wrong path." Andre swallowed, nodding slowly. I didn't mean to worry her. Sometimes it feels like there's no way out, you know." Darrell nodded, his heart aching for the boy. "There's always a way out, Andre. You just have to be willing to look for it. And if you ever need help, I'm here. Don't hesitate to reach out." When they arrived at Anders' home, his mother rushed out, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her son. She thanked Daryl profusely, her gratitude palpable, and Daryl felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had done more than just his job. He had made a difference, however small, in the lives of a family struggling to stay afloat. As he drove back to the precinct, Daryl reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered his first day, the assumptions he had made, the anger and frustration that had clouded his judgment. Maya's guidance had transformed him, helping him see beyond the badge, beyond the rules, and into the heart of what it meant to serve. Later that night, as he sat in his quiet apartment, Daryl received a text from Maya. She had heard about his handling of Andrew's situation, and her message was simple. "You're making me proud, Officer Thompson. Keep it up." Daryl smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. He knew he still had a long way to go, but he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. He was no longer just an officer enforcing the law. He was a part of Lincoln Heights, a guardian of its people, and an advocate for change. In that moment, he understood that Maya's legacy was not just a title or a position. It was a way of life, a commitment to justice tempered with compassion, and he was honored to carry it forward. Redemption in the neighborhood. Months had passed since Daryl had begun walking the streets of Lincoln Heights as an officer, with Maya's guidance etched into his approach. Each day brought new challenges, and with every call he responded to, he gained a deeper understanding of the neighborhood's pulse. Maya had shown him that policing was not about power or control. It was about service, humility, and the courage to face difficult truths. He was becoming not only an officer but a part of the community he served. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted lazily from the trees, Daryl was out on patrol when he noticed a familiar face. Jamal, the young man he had caught trying to steal food from Mr. Patel's store months earlier. Jamal was walking down the street, his head held high, a slight smile on his face. Daryl waved to him, and Jamal's face lit up with recognition as he crossed the street to greet him. "Officer Thompson," Jamal said, a wide grin breaking across his face. "Good to see you, man." Daryl smiled back, genuinely happy to see the young man doing well. "Jamal, how's it going? You keeping out of trouble?" Jamal laughed, nodding. "Yes, sir. I got a job through that program you connected me with. It's nothing fancy, just working in a warehouse, but it pays, and it keeps me busy." "That's great to hear," Daryl said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I'm proud of you. I know it wasn't easy getting back on track." Jamal nodded, his expression turning serious. "You know, if it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be right now. That night, you didn't just treat me like some thug. You saw me as a person, someone worth helping. That meant more than you'll ever know." Daryl felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. He had learned that compassion and understanding could do more than any punishment ever could. And seeing Jamal now, standing tall and proud, made all his struggles and doubts worthwhile. As they talked, an elderly woman approached them, her face lined with years of hardship, but her eyes bright with warmth. She was carrying a bag of groceries that seemed too heavy for her frail frame, and Daryl immediately stepped forward to help her. "Let me carry that for you, Mom," he offered, taking the bag from her hands. She looked up at him, her gaze filled with gratitude. "Thank you, officer," she said softly. "It's nice to see someone who cares about us." Daryl helped her walk the short distance to her apartment building, chatting with her about her family and her life in Lincoln Heights. She told him stories of the neighborhood's history, of the days when things were simpler, and of her pride in the community despite the struggles they faced. As they reached her building, she placed a gentle hand on his arm, her gaze earnest. "We've had our share of troubles here, Officer Thompson," she said, "but it's people like you who give us hope, people who see us as more than just cases or statistics. You're one of us now." Daryl swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had always wanted to make a difference, to follow in his father's footsteps, but he had never imagined the depth of connection and responsibility that came with serving the community. The woman's words reaffirmed his purpose, reminding him of why he wore the badge each day. Just as he was leaving her building, his radio crackled to life, breaking the quiet moment. A call came in reporting a disturbance at the Lincoln Heights Community Center, a heated confrontation between two local groups that had a long-standing rivalry. Daryl's heart sank as he realized the potential for escalation. This was more than just a fight. It was a powder keg of tension that had been brewing for years. He rushed to the scene, his mind racing as he tried to anticipate how best to approach the situation. When he arrived, he found a group of young men gathered on one side of the street, their expressions hardened, their postures tense. On the other side was a second group, equally defiant, their eyes narrowed with resentment. The air was thick with hostility, and Daryl could see that the slightest misstep could spark violence. He took a deep breath, drawing on everything Maya had taught him. This was not a moment for authority or force. It was a moment for connection, for understanding. He stepped into the space between the two groups, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "All right, everyone, let's take a breath," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I know there's a lot of tension here, but we're not going to solve anything by fighting. Let's talk this out." The young men glared at him, their distrust evident. One of them, a tall teenager with a defiant expression, scoffed. "What do you know about it, officer? You don't live our lives. You don't know what we go through." Daryl met his gaze, unflinching. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to live your life. But I do know that hurting each other isn't going to fix anything. I'm here to listen, to help if I can. But I can't do that if you're tearing each other apart." The teenager's expression softened, but only slightly. Daryl could see that he was still wary, still guarded. He took a step closer, lowering his voice, so only the young man could hear. "Look, I grew up in a neighborhood like this," Daryl said, his tone gentle. "I know what it's like to feel like the world's stacked against you, to feel like no one's listening. But I'm here, and I'm listening. You have my word." The teenager hesitated, glancing at his friends for support. Slowly he nodded, his posture relaxing as he took a step back. The tension in the air began to dissipate, and Daryl could feel the shift, a small but significant step toward peace. Over the next hour, he worked to mediate the dispute, listening to both sides, validating their frustrations, and encouraging them to find common ground. It wasn't easy. Decades of resentment and mistrust didn't disappear overnight. But by the time they dispersed, Daryl felt a sense of accomplishment. He had diffused a dangerous situation not with force, but with empathy and understanding. As he watched them walk away, Daryl felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Maya standing behind him, a proud smile on her face. She had been observing from a distance, letting him handle the situation on his own, and he could see that he had passed her silent test. "You did well, Officer Thompson," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I couldn't have handled it better myself." Daryl smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Thank you, Captain. I wanted to make sure they felt heard." Maya nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "That's what it's all about, Daryl. Policing isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about building bridges, making connections, and understanding the people we serve. You've learned that lesson well." As they walked back to the precinct together, Maya shared stories from her own experiences, tales of challenges and triumphs that had shaped her career. Daryl listened intently, absorbing her wisdom, and feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Later that night, as he sat alone in his apartment, Daryl reflected on his journey. He thought of all the lives he had touched, the people who had trusted him, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He realized that he was no longer just a rookie officer trying to prove himself. He was a part of Lincoln Heights, a guardian of its people, and a voice for those who often went unheard. And as he looked out over the quiet streets, he felt a profound sense of belonging. He knew that he had found his purpose, not in power or authority, but in service, compassion, and connection. He was proud to be Officer Darrell Thompson, a protector of Lincoln Heights and a disciple of Captain Maya Williams' legacy. Legacy and new beginnings. The cold, crisp air of winter settled over Lincoln Heights, and the holiday lights strung along the main streets gave the neighborhood a rare glow of warmth. For Darrell, it was a reminder of how far he had come. It had been nearly a year since he first set foot in Lincoln Heights, uncertain and burdened by his own biases. Now he walked those same streets with pride, recognized not just as Officer Thompson, but as a part of the community. Maya watched his transformation with quiet satisfaction. In her new role as captain, she no longer patrolled the streets daily, but she kept a close watch on the officers under her command, especially Darrell. She saw in him a reflection of her own journey, a commitment to serve, a heart open to learning, and a dedication to protecting the people who depended on him. One evening, Maya called Darrell into her office. He had grown accustomed to the solemn weight of her office, its walls lined with commendations, community awards, and photographs from Maya's decades of service. Darrell had always admired those tokens of her legacy, hoping to build one of his own. "Sit down, Darrell," Maya said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her tone was warm, but there was a hint of gravity in her voice. Darrell took a seat, feeling a ripple of anticipation. "What's on your mind, Captain?" Maya leaned back, her fingers intertwined as she studied him. "It's been a long journey for you, hasn't it?" Darrell nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It has, ma'am. I never thought I'd feel this close to a place. Lincoln Heights, it's more than just a neighborhood to me now. It's home." Maya's eyes softened. "And that, Darrell, is why I believe you're ready for the next step." Darrell's brow furrowed in surprise. "The next step?" Maya nodded, sliding a document across the desk toward him. He glanced down at it, his eyes widening as he realized what it was, a recommendation for him to take on a leadership role within the precinct. The title was Assistant Community Liaison Officer, a position that would make him one of the primary points of contact between the police and the community, a role that was as much about diplomacy and trust building as it was about enforcing the law. "I want you to take on this position," Maya said, her voice firm. "You've shown an understanding of this community that goes beyond what most officers ever achieve. You've earned their trust, and I believe you can bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people we serve." Darrell felt a mixture of pride and trepidation. This was an incredible honor, but it was also a heavy responsibility. "Captain, I don't know what to say. I'm honored, but are you sure I'm ready?" Maya's lips curled into a gentle smile. "Darrell, you've shown me time and again that you're more than capable. You've handled conflicts with empathy, connected with people who felt unheard, and even turned potential adversaries into allies. This position isn't just about skill, it's about heart, and you have that." Darrell looked down at the document again, feeling the weight of her words. He thought back to the many lives he had touched, the people he had helped, and the lessons he had learned. He knew that this was what he wanted, to make a difference not just as an enforcer of the law, but as a true servant of the people. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." Maya nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "I know you won't. Now, go celebrate. You've earned it." Later that evening, Darrell found himself back on the streets, walking through the heart of Lincoln Heights. The holiday decorations sparkled in the cold night air, and the sounds of laughter and music drifted from open doors and bustling restaurants. He felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the season. It was the warmth of belonging, of knowing he had found his place. As he turned the corner, he heard familiar voices calling his name. A group of kids he'd met at the youth center ran up to him, their faces beaming with excitement. "Officer Thompson," one of them shouted, tugging on his sleeve. "Are you coming to the holiday party at the center tomorrow?" Darrell smiled, crouching down to their level. "Of course I am. Wouldn't miss it for the world." They cheered, and he felt a surge of joy. These kids were part of his journey now, a reminder of the future he was helping to shape. They trusted him, looked up to him, and he knew he had a responsibility to guide them, to protect them, and to show them that they mattered. As the kids scampered away, Daryl continued his walk, reflecting on the many moments that had brought him to this point. He remembered the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had shaped his path: Maya, Jamal, Mr. Carter, the elderly woman he'd helped, and countless others. Each interaction, each experience, had left its mark on him, molding him into the officer he was today. When he reached the steps of the community center, he paused, watching the people inside as they decorated for the holiday party. It was a simple gathering, but it represented so much more. It was a celebration of resilience, of community, of the bonds that held them together even in the toughest of times. He stepped inside, greeted by familiar faces and warm smiles. Maya was there too, helping the volunteers hang up lights and set up tables. She saw him and gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had accomplished together. As the night wore on, Daryl mingled with the guests, talking to old friends and meeting new faces. He listened to their stories, their hopes, and their struggles, feeling a renewed sense of purpose with each conversation. He knew that his role in Lincoln Heights was not just about enforcing the law. It was about being a constant presence, a steady hand, and a source of strength for those who needed it. At one point, Jamal approached him, holding a plate of cookies. "Officer Thompson," he said, a glint of mischief in his eyes, "I never got to say it, but thanks for everything." Daryl chuckled, clapping him on the back. "You don't need to thank me, Jamal. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're making us all proud." As the evening wound down, Maya gathered everyone around, raising a glass and a toast. She spoke of the challenges the community had faced, the resilience they had shown, and the importance of coming together to support one another. Her words were met with cheers and applause, and Daryl felt a surge of gratitude for the woman who had been his mentor, his guide, and his inspiration. When the party ended, Daryl walked Maya out to her car. They stood together on the quiet street, the warmth of the evening still lingering in the air. "Thank you, Maya," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." Maya smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did the work, Daryl. I just showed you the path. The rest was all you." They stood in silence for a moment, both of them reflecting on the journey they had shared. Finally, Maya nodded toward the precinct, her eyes twinkling with pride. "Now it's your turn to lead, Daryl. Lincoln Heights is in your hands." Daryl watched as she drove away, feeling a mix of gratitude and resolve. He knew that his work was far from over, but he was ready. He was no longer just an officer. He was a protector, a guardian, and a trusted member of the community. As he walked back to his patrol car, the quiet streets of Lincoln Heights stretched out before him, filled with memories, challenges, and the promise of new beginnings. He knew that he would face more struggles, more conflicts, but he was prepared to meet them head-on, guided by the values Maya had instilled in him. And as he drove through the neighborhood, watching the lights twinkle in the cold night air, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his purpose, his place, and his people, and he would dedicate himself to serving them with honor, compassion, and unwavering commitment. Lincoln Heights was more than just a neighborhood. It was his home, his legacy, and the heart of everything he had worked for, and he would protect it, no matter what.